Welcome everybody to the December Canada Wildfire webinar. I'm really excited to have Tristan Skretting here with us today. Tristan is a recent MSc graduate from the University of Lethbridge, and her topic ended up being very timely for her master's research. She's going to be talking us today about fuels distribution in Jasper National Park before the Jasper Wildfire Complex, and looking at mountain pine beetle and 20 years of FireSmart as they relate to that. So welcome, Tristan.
Thank you so much for having me today and for everyone for joining. Am I ready to get going?
Yeah, you can take it from here. And just so everyone knows, the webinar is going to be recorded. It will be posted to our YouTube channel early next week, and we're going to run a Q&A at the end. So should any questions come up, please just pop them in the chat box and we'll make sure to get to them once Tristan's done. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. As she said, I recently completed my master's research looking at fuel distributions in Jasper National Park. At the time, I did not know that it would be directly before the Jasper Wildfire Complex or the fires that occurred this summer. But I was looking at both the distributions of mountain pine beetle impacted fuels, as well as the 20 years of FireSmart management activities that have occurred around the municipality of Jasper for a couple decades now. I want to begin this presentation by acknowledging both the land I am speaking from today. I'm in Fernie in the Kootenays, which is the traditional lands of the Ktunaxa people, as well as the land I will be discussing today, Jasper, which is located in Treaty 6 and Treaty 8 lands, as well as the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Assiniboine-Winewak, Adeneza, Nehio, Secwepemc, Stoney Nakoda, Mountain Métis, and Métis peoples who have stewarded the land and fire on the landscape before the prohibition of those practices. I just have a bit of a preamble here to set the stage. I had originally envisioned this talk to be specifically about the second chapter of my master's. I'm evaluating the managed stands, the 20-odd years of FireSmart and wildfire risk reduction surrounding the Jasper municipality, but I've opened it up to include my first chapter as well, examining the mountain pine beetle fuels in light of the fires that occurred there over this summer. As you can see, our measured plots for these mountain pine beetle fuels are right smack in the center of the burn perimeter for this summer. So forgive me if I jump back and forth a bit between the two types of fuel distributions that were both impacted by the fire. On July 22nd, 2024, lightning ignited a wildfire in Jasper National Park, approximately 32 kilometers south of the community of Jasper in Western Alberta, Canada. 2 days later, the fire reached the town and ultimately destroyed 38 residences and other structures. By coincidence, the present study involved measuring the fuel structure of the conifer forests of the Athabasca Valley, with the majority of fuel plots contained within this fire perimeter. While the present analysis was completed beforehand, the fire and damage greatly heightened the immediate importance of this fuel survey work. It was quite the mindset to be in as I prepared for my thesis defense in mid-July to see the notification that Jasper was evacuating, and then that the fire had reached the town on Wednesday, 2 days later. And then the next morning, I was defending this research on fuel structure and its potential implications as the fuels were burning or already consumed. So that was quite the week. Very, very intense. Okay, so establishing specific disturbance baseline fuels in altered fuel complexes is increasingly necessary to evaluate fire hazard potential as well as ecosystem change at large, because our ability to protect communities, homes, and human safety, at least in part, relies on our ability to predict how a fire will spread should it occur and mitigate those potential effects based on those predictions. This can involve preventative fuel treatments before a fire begins or operational procedures during a fire event. So understanding what is out there to burn, how it is changing, or fire fuel baselines and trajectories under these changing climate normals is of increasing importance. A century of fire exclusion across the landscape has led to the accumulation of a lot of biomass fuels without that historic periodic cleanout that fire used to provide. These built-up fuels are now being subject to warmer and drier conditions that also set the stage for widespread insect outbreaks and potential for disease with higher density of hosts for these organisms to spread through. This has been the case with one such organism, the mountain pine beetle, with epidemic spread through Western Canada since the early 2000s. Improved understanding of the complex spatial and temporal interactions between insect outbreaks, fuels, and wildland fire potential is of increasing importance as climatic warming increases wildland fire potential across Western Canada. So my study region is within the Montane Cordillera ecozone, which is the most diverse within Canada. This region experiences the highest density per hectare of human-caused wildfires in the country, as found by Coogan et al. 2020. This zone is also experiencing increasing numbers of lightning-caused fires and number of days with lightning fire starts with a warming climate. My study area here, Jasper National Park, as well as the rest of the contiguous mountain parks and eastern slopes have been experiencing significant departures from pre-exclusion fire return intervals. So the makeup and arrangement of wildland fire fuels obviously influence how fire behaves and move through the vertical strata of fuels that we consider. The ground fuels, your litter and duff, to your surface, your ladder fuels, which are your connecting fuels, and then up in the crowns of your overstory trees. The vegetation type and condition obviously impact the moisture levels and the connectivity between these fuels and specific arrangements. The Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System has utilized broad descriptive fuel types for decades. These have been necessary for operations as a quick classification, so personnel could describe what the fire is burning through, how it might be expected to spread. However, with complex, disturbed, or altered fuels that are becoming increasingly prevalent across the landscape, it's difficult to accurately categorize and then predict behavior within this framework that was built on natural stands and more moderate conditions. In the fire behavior prediction system, there are 7 coniferous fuel types with constant descriptions of structural characteristics, surface and canopy fuel loadings, and canopy base heights. This makes it very streamlined to calculate fire predictions when a fire occurs, but again, there are concerns of a lack of representativeness in these limited fuel types for the entire large country that we live within. Many stands have varying canopy base heights or densities than the values baked in for these historical fuel types, and it's difficult to account for these things such as disturbance and management. And so my work spans 2 types of altered fuel complexes. The cause of the first is insect outbreak, more specifically mountain pine beetle. Mountain pine beetle and wildland fire are both primary disturbance agents across Western Canada with complex interactions with fire. Over 18 million hectares have been impacted, and though the epidemic level spread that we experienced from the 90s and early 2000s is largely over, the repercussions of the legacy structure left behind is critical to understand moving forward. The gray phase of mountain pine beetle, characterized by after needles from beetle-killed trees have fallen, but before the majority of standing snakes fall down, can last over a decade, from about 4 to 10-ish years post-beetle infestation. Many studies have suggested that the hazard of crown fire potential in gray phase stands could be reduced due to the loss of these canopy fuels. However, this may be counteracted by an increase in rate of spread in surface fire due to increased solar radiation and in-stand wind speeds, higher amounts of cured grass or herbaceous material in the spring and fall, and surface fire intensity due to down woody debris load-in. Instances of high severity crown fire have also been found in gray phase outbreak despite low canopy fuel load, highlighting the variation in fire behavior that can emerge in these affected stands. Mountain pine beetle also rarely has 100% mortality, this picture notwithstanding, and dead standing fuel levels also create often create a mosaic across the landscape. Despite this, few studies have looked at how variable levels of outbreak severity could add complexity to fuel loading and structure within this temporal phase. So many of our fire behavior prediction systems rely on these established fuel types and their relationships with rate of spread and fuel consumption. And there is some difficulty in fitting many of our fuel conditions and arrangements that exist across our landscapes within the accepted and tested fuel and fire behavior associations, especially with these disturbed fuels. This was found in the interior of BC by Parakis et al. 2018, and as well as Barron et al. 2024. I believe she gave a talk webinar similar to this just a few weeks ago, highlighting these fuel typing mismatches. And these are more pronounced in non-boreal areas, harvested stands, regenerating stands, and insect disturbed stands. And so here we have the fuel type decision tree for mountain pine beetle affected stands, pipelining it into a fire behavior prediction system fuel type based on stand density, so open or dense, time since attack, and then percent mortality, as well as species composition, if it's pure pine or if there's other species of mixed conifer stands. And so you can see that if it was a more open stand, 6 years since attack, so firmly in the gray phase, experiencing severe mortality, it would be classified as a boreal spruce fuel type. And if you can think back to the picture 2 slides ago, just the changes in surface fuel conditions from a boreal spruce type to this open stand, heavy mortality, conditions of solar radiation and wind speeds seem like they would not be very aligned. And the other type of altered fuel complex examined in this work are fuel treatments. Fuel treatments are, of course, preemptive manipulation and reduction of vegetative fuels to alter and reduce fire behavior and spread if a fire should occur or move through the stand to ease resistance to control. This is done with many techniques, including prescribed burns, mechanical thinning and pruning, mulching and mastication, usually with the overarching aims to reduce surface fuels, reduce canopy bulk density, and increase that gap between surface and crown fuels. The short-term efficacy of successful treatments is well documented, but the longevity and maintenance intervals of such are less well known and dependent on local regeneration rates. However, long-term studies and monitoring programs are often difficult to implement with changing perceptions, funding, and management policies surrounding these practices. So overall, I wanted to find out how fuels vary across both insect disturbs and managed areas within Jasper National Park, with the specific objectives to assess fire fuel distribution along a gradient of gray phase mountain pine beetle severity, as well as to assess fire fuel distribution over time since fuel reduction treatment. A bit more about Jasper National Park. Approximately 55% of the lodgepole pine has been impacted by the mountain pine beetle outbreak. It had experienced prolific mountain pine beetle outbreak, which was firmly established as epidemic level spread by 2011. The mountain pine beetle was discovered in the Miette drainage by the West Gate as early as 2002. The largest spatial extent estimated was 229,000 hectares of area impacted before this major population die-off event in 2018. Previous studies by Chavardes and Daniels identified coniferous infilling and homogenization of forest structure, as well as 5 missed fire return intervals since fire explosion practices began. Before this, fires burned often at a low to mixed severity in the valley bottoms, with fire return intervals from as little as 6 to 60 years, depending on the area coverage. Over 1,000 hectares around the town site had also been treated with some sort of fuel reduction management practice beginning in the early 2000s in an effort to create defensible space around the town site, as well as in response to the potential increase in hazard from the mountain pine beetle altered fuel complexes. And this is just to give an idea of that coniferous infilling that has taken place. This is just north of the Jasper town site, looking north towards the Henry House Flats. Parks has actually now been conducting prescribed burns on the Henry House Flats. But this infilling is just to give you an idea. It's pretty consistent throughout the valley. This project was done by Janine Ramtola and Eric Higgs through the University of Alberta, showing landscape change using repeat photography, which is in turn developed into the Mountain Legacy Project, which is a really neat tool to show vegetative change and how the landscape has changed over since the early 1900s when these survey photos were taken. So I'm just trying to give you an idea of the change in fuel loading and the structural distribution in this valley. And so my first objective was capturing the variability in fuels from a range of mountain pine beetle mortality. I actually just submitted this into the Canadian Journal of Forestry Research, so fingers crossed, it's exciting for me. The arrangement and density of pine on the landscape impacted how the beetle spread throughout the valley and the park, leaving a mosaic of mountain pine beetle severity, from a few dead pines, a few dead trees in a stand mixed with other live pines, spruce or fir, to potential total mortality in a pure pine stand. Past research has looked at how fuels change as time since beetle progresses from that green to red to gray to old phase, but we thought surely we have largely gray phase across the landscape. Surely the varying level of mortality also impacts how the stand fuel distribution is represented. So that's what we tried to find out. So over the summers of 2021 to 2023, forest mensuration data was collected as outlined in the protocol for the next generation Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System. At this time, mountain pine beetle was largely in gray phase across the bottom of the Athabasca Valley, with varying pine mortality levels generally decreasing as we moved south. Because of the almost absolute population die-off due to cold winter snaps from 2018 to 2019, cumulative disturbance after that has been negligible, existing in small pockets to the south and north and at higher elevations. This data was processed into stand level fuel attributes for each fuel strata and classified into broad severity ratings of light being less than 35% pine mortality, moderate 36 to 65%, and then severe over 65% pine mortality within a stand. This was scaled up from Wolder et al.'s 2009 severity thresholds, as continued epidemic spread has resulted in much higher impact than their data collected from 2003. So also we had coincident airborne lidar collected in 2021 and 2022. So to figure out what kind of spatial extent was covered in our severity ratings, I used the Jasper Vegetation Resource Inventory GIS layer and isolated the lodgepole dominated stands, and then classified these into our severity classes using the disturbance codes provided within that layer. And to compare the extent of stands impacted by mountain pine beetle as determined by the VRI, compared with the surveys done by Oleszynski and Brett. Now at the peak of outbreak in 2018 and 2019, we had over 229,000 hectares of impacted area. This highlights the extent of the spread of the beetle, but doesn't really show the range of impact and if all stands within that perimeter were pine or beetle impacted. And so the VRI has smaller area output coverage, but gives us some idea of how the extents of each of our severity ratings. And so my hypothesis for this mountain pine beetle objective was as mortality levels increase, I expected increased litter amounts, and then the surface fuel might have different species coverage due to the opening of the canopy, more coniferous regeneration, and then increased woody debris as those branches and snags start to fall, and then potentially more shrubs and more connectivity, but then a extreme loss of fine fuels from the crown. And what we found, I know this is a lot of numbers, I just wanted to show the species composition for our stands, and this shows that lightly impacted stands had inherently higher densities of both overstory mature trees and small trees, and a greater mixed conifer composition. It's obviously level of mountain pine beetle impact is hard to separate from those starting stand conditions and species composition. But I just wanted to highlight that also the moderate and severe plots were experiencing high levels of pine mortality, even within the small tree, so DBH 3 to 9 centimeter sub-canopy cohort. This is interesting as it shows the level of the outbreak as it had exhausted the preferred DBH of trees that mountain pine beetle typically prefer, that thicker phloem, over 20 centimeters usually, and it had also nearly exhausted those in the subcanopy before that die-off event occurred. For ground and surface fuels, herbaceous vegetation coverage and loading was 3 times higher in severe plots than in light, indicating that species coverage shift may have been occurring. Interestingly, the litter loading was not significant, but there was an average of 3 times more seedlings in light severity plots. A lack of recruitment post-infestation has been found in nearby areas as well, of Robb, Alberta by McIntosh and McDonald, as well as near Grand Prairie, I believe that was Leifers et al. So this is of ecological importance, and continued monitoring can confirm severity's impact on community regeneration. Duff was found to be highest in severe plots despite a shorter organic layer depth, suggesting compaction, though this is likely not a result of mountain pine beetle outbreak because it was still early on into that gray phase. For canopy and ladder fuels, a significant loss in canopy bulk density was seen for both overstory trees and our immature small trees. However, I was considering how a lower starting mean stand density in those severe stands was perhaps influencing these levels. So to account for differing starting stand densities, a relative loss was also calculated from each severity class's pre-mountain pine beetle modeled canopy fuel loading as if experiencing no mortality. So severe plots lost 49% of their original mature canopy bulk density, moderate stands lost 35%, and light lost 17% of their original foliage loading. And then severe stands also lost 49% of their small tree canopy bulk density. Moderate stands lost 19%, and then light just lost 6% within that small tree cohort. So you can see quite a large difference between that. And then overstory canopy base height was lowest in severe plots, with just under 4 meters as opposed to around 8 meters for both moderate and light plots. So I wanted to talk about fuel availability and high fire hazard in scenarios in mountain pine beetle stands. Previous studies such as Tolucci and Krawchuk in central BC found that more branch structure is consumed in high mortality gray phase in high fire weather scenarios, suggesting that fuel availability is impacted and consumption may include large proportions of the branch structure in high severity fires. This was observationally seen in the Chettaman fire in north of Jasper in 2022, in the fall of 2022, which is now the second largest fire in Jasper in 100 years, which included a large area of 50% pine with 30 to 60% mountain pine beetle mortality, which would align with our moderate severity class. To outline how much fuel would be available for consumption in future similar scenarios or the Jasper Wildfire Complex, the fuel loading was recalculated to not just include foliage, but also the entire branch structure. As you can see in moderate stands, the mean available fuel load doubles, and in severe stands, it almost quadruples. This, of course, has large impacts for intensity potential, but would not necessarily all be expected to burn in the flaming front, but it would smolder with longer residence times, which is difficult for safety operationally. But as we'll discuss with the wildfire complex, that consumption did take place at a pretty rapid rate. And so We can see that stand structure in light mountain pine beetle outbreak severity may be more easily translated to existing FBP fuel types and have remaining subcanopy structure that will promote structural heterogeneity in areas that were outside of the burn perimeter. The severity of mountain pine beetle outbreak significantly impacts canopy fuels with notable differences in subcanopy cohort, with those severe stands being more purely pine and those small trees also getting taken out. In severe stands, the domination of herbaceous vegetation may have been signaling a shift to more open stand or grassland ecosystem types. Even in the context of the Jasper fires, some studies have found that this level of stand breakdown condition, the seed bank can be less vigorous or diminished for logical reestablishment, and especially in high severity fires, those seeds can be completely combusted instead of just opening up those serotinous cones. So the regeneration may be at diminished levels than it would have been if a low or moderate fire had gone through. Monitoring these areas over the next 10 and beyond years will be extremely informative for successional trajectories for stands that experience the compounding disturbance of epidemic level insect defoliation and mortality, followed by a high intensity fire. So moving on to my second objective, which was fuel treatment efficacy over time in Jasper National Park. I wanted to assess, based on field data, how fuel varies through those vertical strata since the time over time since onset of management, and then compare those field data with remotely sensed plots across managed and unmanaged stands using airborne lidar derived stem density and canopy metrics. And I expected that as time since fuel reduction increases, regeneration will recover those reduced canopy fuels, and then shrubs and sapling and small trees will increase vertical connectivity over time, and that woody debris and litter may increase surface fuels as well. And so we had 6 field plots, which were supplemented with lidar-derived plots over a range of treatment years. We also used coincident lidar to derive these canopy metrics using Arbosense and the R-packaged lidar. Treatment in there was 595 extracted plots, and these were grouped into treatment age groups of old, which were treated about 20 years prior to the field measurements, treated 2003 to 2005, intermediate, treated 2008 to 2009, and then recent treatments treated 2019 to 2021. And these were just natural groupings of when more fuel reductions management were occurring. And then these were compared with 139 unmanaged plots in the Athabasca Valley. Treatment in these areas were mechanical and thinning in nature, with Doug fir and pine as their primary overstarry species. Plots were gridded out with 30-meter spacing in between, and then unmanaged plots were selected along the valley with similar slope and species composition from the Vegetation Resource Index. And so I'll get a little bit into the Arbosense Fuels tool. I believe Chen Shang did also a webinar a few months ago, and so if you're more interested in getting more details on this, you should definitely go watch that. It's great. For my project, the fuel attributes, including canopy base height and canopy bulk density, were determined using the Arbosense tool developed by Hatfield consultants, notably Chen Shang, in collaboration with Chasmer and Hopkinson, using the data from the next generation fuel plots that were collected by our lab throughout the eastern slopes, Jasper and beyond, to train this random forest model. This tool imports airborne lidar data, ground classifies and normalizes the point clouds, and then produces a broad range of derivative products. The tool then uses the derivatives within a random forest predictive modeling framework by iterating through linear and nonlinear multiple regression models within a regression tree approach to determine the highest relationship relative to field data, based on 70% training and then 30% testing data from the plot measurements. So this is a cool tool because if you have ground fuel plot data, you can include this in its calculations. And the outputs generally for the Arbosense for our fuels had a R-squared value of 0.64 for the canopy base height and 0.81 for canopy fuels. And so the first thing I did with our field data was compare the densities of the components within each vertical fuel strata and compare it with current prescription guidelines. So if we were going into a stand and looking at what components might be suggested for removal, if it were to be treated today, how many of those components require attention. And so you can see the surface fuel components increase with time as time since treatment increases. And then by the time we're at that 13-year or so intermediate treatment age, there's quite a few subcanopy trees that have regenerated and are exceeding density guidelines. And then ladder fuels are most prolific in the oldest treatments. Again, there's a lot of numbers in this table, but I just wanted to highlight that surface fuels were not very variable between treatment ages. This makes sense as these treatments were mechanical in nature mostly. There is a difference in coniferous regeneration being double that of recent treatments in both intermediate and old treatment ages. So when we were evaluating the canopy metrics that were output with the additional lidar-derived plots, we see a significant reduction in canopy bulk density as time since treatment decreases, with the lowest in recent stands. However, you see that intermediate and old treatment ages were not significantly different, though these were still lower than the unmanaged stands. And we see very similar trends for the canopy cover values. Again, not significantly different between intermediate and old treatment ages, still lower than the unmanaged stands, but then the recent is the most decreased. And then interestingly, we see that the lowest canopy base height was found to be in the most recently treated stands in these lidar derived plots. The opposite trend was seen in the field data. In field measured stands, the canopy base height was 3.5 meters in the most recent treatments, and the oldest treatments were 2.7, so very similar values, which may just have to do with the airborne lidar dealing with different canopy densities. And so the takeaways from the managed stands suggest a lack of change in surface fuels means likely that the critical surface fire intensity will remain low, and that the increase in small trees and ladder fuels by the time that treatments are 13 years old mean that a maintenance program could really prolong this the life expectancy kind of thing of these treatments. Reduction of canopy bulk density and canopy cover remain for 20 years, but metrics are very similar between intermediate and old treatment ages. As well, canopy base height from the ALS may be influenced by canopy density. In denser stands, there's more occlusion, and so canopy base height may be harder to truly identify. So to bring this back to the Jasper Wildfire Complex that occurred this summer, I just wanted to show kind of the spread days in that those first 3 days of huge spread, and how that correlates with our mountain pine beetle fuels. You see a lot of involvement in these fuels within the burn perimeter. And then this is also just a satellite imagery grab of the Wabasso campground as well as the town site, and you can just see how the extent of and the severity of that burn. And we were lucky enough to get to go, well, my lab was lucky enough to go back into Jasper and measure all of our plots again post-fire. So there will be lots of exciting information to come out of that. We were seeing, again, lots of branch structure loss, like Tolucci and Krawchuk did in their paper, as well as was observationally seen in that Chedeman fire. Lots of complete consumption of downed wood, which I had never seen this kind of phantom tree line before, which is, yeah, pretty insane. And then lots of blowdown as well during the fire event in these mountain pine beetle affected areas. And then fuel consumption in FireSmart areas. There was crown involvement, as you can see, but a lot less branch structure consumed in these dug firs. But it's hard to really speak to the impact of the treatments, as these are very close to residential areas, so suppression tactics are often very different than just having the fire burn through. But it will still be very informative having this pre-fire information for both the pine beetle affected stands and the treated stands, and then having that fire move through. And then this we can see, oh, this is the most recent, one of the most recently treated stands. It's quite open, but you can see these two aspen here align with this, and just a lot less intensity. And yeah, go back to how intense the fire was in some areas. The firestorm that it generated was strong enough to pick up a shipping container near that Wabasso campground, I believe, and toss it into the Athabasca River. It's well over 6,000 pounds. So just imagine the intensity of that fire weather is pretty wild. And then so the question is, has been on a lot of people's minds, what role did mountain pine beetle play here? I think this is definitely a top-down controlled fire. The fire weather conditions were very extreme, and the missed fire return intervals mean this fire was going to be extreme due to those weather conditions. But mountain pine beetle was there. It was prolific throughout the perimeter, but it was just one factor of many. But I keep coming back to this blowdown and how I haven't really seen that before. I was in Waterton when the Kenow fire of 2017 occurred, and it had the historically spicy Waterton winds, as well as a long period of drought beforehand, and you had that huge intense fire run. But all of those trees are still standing, generally, unless they're in avalanche paths today. And so this blowdown to have occurred during the fire event is pretty crazy, and I think that is due to the fuel condition. And we also know that consumption was high, and that it occurred relatively quickly, as there was a rain event a few days after those huge spread days. And so that will give us good insight into fire intensity, and that investigation is ongoing. And what can we find out now? I'm very grateful that we have this detailed fuels information. We can look at fuel consumption and how intensity changed over the landscape, and if mountain pine beetle severity levels maybe have impacted that, depth of burn and surface fire severity. We can reiterate those structural legacies. Did branch structure and crown consumption change with mountain pine beetle severity? And then as well, regeneration. What might we expect to come back? How long will this take? And have these establishment conditions, these baseline conditions changed so much that the ecosystem might entirely shift? So that'll be really interesting. We also have, we're working on canopy scaling for mountain pine beetle before the fire across the landscape and at higher elevations using the airborne lidar. My supervisor, Dr. Laura Chasmer, is working on that, and that should be forthcoming soon. And I just want to acknowledge everybody that allowed and helped this research come together. My lab and field crew, Emily Jones, Dr. Xiaojin Ji, Viviana Lartiga, Linda Fled, and Sayed Parsian, as well as the lidar collection done by Dr. Chris Hopkinson and Maximo Okumenko, and then my supervisory committee, Hatfield Consultants, and then all of these various funding sources. Of course, this work is only possible through sources such as these. Thank you so much for your time and for listening. I'll answer some questions now, but if you want to contact me about anything, feel free to reach out as well.
Thank you, Tristan. That was great. It's a testament to how well you presented because I have about 8 questions on my piece of paper, and I feel like every single one of them you answered by the end of your presentation. So just a reminder to everyone, if you would like, you can post any questions for Tristan into the chat box, or if you're comfortable being recorded, you are also more than welcome to unmute and turn on your camera, but please be aware that you will be on the recording that will be posted to our YouTube channel. So I guess I can ask some of these questions still, maybe we can elaborate on them a little. But I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about any plans for the post-burn consumption analysis from the data that you and your group collected.
Of course. Because we were able to get in I think it was early November that my team got to go up there. We have, especially the down woody debris consumption will be difficult to parse out because we experienced such crazy blowdown. We'll have to do some investigative kind of maybe forensic work based on the lidar data that we have and our pre-fire stand field data trying to figure out which trees were standing before the fire occurred, and then which trees fell and became part of the down woody debris loading, and how much down woody debris loading was there before. And then between those two things, saying, was this part of the standing fuel load, or was this part of the fuel loading on the forest floor, and how much consumption occurred between the two. Maybe, there's a lot of areas with complete consumption of both, or a lot of consumption of both. I think will give further insight into how intense the fire was, but a lot of areas also had complete organic layer loss, and so that consumption will just kind of be the pre-fire value, and so that'll be forthcoming and will be pretty informative.
Thank you. I see 2 questions in the chat. I will come back to the first one, but the second one's more on topic for what we're speaking about now. So did you see more blowdown of beetle-killed trees than live trees in your blowdown analysis, or did your lab teams notice anything?
I believe so. I was injured, so I wasn't able to participate in this lab collection, this field collection, but I believe these areas were more beetle-killed trees than the live trees. But I think, as it was strong enough to pick up a 6,000-pound shipping container, some live trees may have also been experiencing that blowdown.
Thanks, Tristan. Okay, why do you think surface fuels remain lower over time in treated stands risk reduction? I would expect them to fill in over time, at least to some extent.
Yeah, that was kind of a surprising result. And we did see increases in live woody fuel, so some shrub and regeneration infilling impacting that fuel loading. But yeah, I was expecting more litter fall and maybe down woody debris impacting that fuel load, but we just didn't really see too much of a change. So I'm not too sure. I was also expecting to see that.
As a follow-up to that, do you have, or were you able to get information on how the treatment was done in each scenario, or is that something that was outside of the scope?
Yeah, they were thinning in nature and just mechanically done. So there was no removal of the forest floor at that time. And that is largely in part because of the proximity to the residential areas. These are around, largely around Lake Edith, and there's a little residential area. And so they weren't going to be doing any prescribed burning in that area. I think they did remove some of the woody fuels that fell during that thinning. But yeah.
So this question is kind of where I was going. Can you confirm all the treatments were mechanical nature, no hand treatments or prescribed fire to do those? Okay.
Yeah, they were all thinning.
I'm just curious with the mechanical nature of it, if maybe there was some compaction of the soil layer. Okay. Okay, so based on this research, are you able to make any recommendations to better design wildfire prevention in your communities?
Yes, I think one big thing that's missing is maintenance programs, and it's very hard to implement. I know the BC Wildfire Service says it's one of the most important things going forward is that people have this kind of sense of security when a treatment has been done, no matter how long ago this took place, or they're just unsure of the changes that how the changes that have occurred with regeneration might be impacting that fire hazard potential. And so, with what we found, I would say like minimum 10 years, 5 years would be good, but maybe not a lot of changes have happened by that 5 year mark, but definitely by 10 years we were starting to see changes in that small tree regeneration, changes in juniper density, changes in ladder fuels. And so just a 10-year revisit could really bring things back down to that prescription level value, as opposed to waiting until seeing if 20 years from now people still feel protected because that treatment was done, but that that connectivity is working its way back up. I'd say monitoring and light maintenance keeps things cost effective as well.
Great, thanks. And I know dependent on where you are, mountain pine beetle mitigation can be a huge thing as well, but perhaps really highlighting the need to remove mountain pine beetle kills in your communities would be,
Yeah, and
I would assume.
it's tough because in such prolific spreads, the amount of work is insurmountable. Some people right after this fire were saying, well, this should have all been cleared, but how do you clear cut a national park? That is also unacceptable to a lot of people's values and ecological values. And so yeah, it's really difficult when you get this level of disturbance, how to move forward from that.
Absolutely. And I know we often think about prescribed fire or hazard reduction burning, but when you throw the volatility of those stands into the mix, it's a whole nother level of risk. So
When they get
completely
to that
understood
point,
there.
it's difficult to move forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Tristan. I don't know if there's any answer to this question, but it really flagged with me when you were talking about the low canopy base height in recent treatments and the canopy density impacting ALS. And I'm just curious about if there are thoughts about any like mitigation measures or ways to correct for that, or if it would just require more ground truthing to know what's happening there.
Yeah, so I I have been working through this wonderful remote sensing lab, and I've learned a lot, but it's not my strong suit. I have been enjoying using the wonderful tools, but it's basically that in denser stands, the occlusion can impact those values as you move lower through the canopy. This can be mitigated, or the error can be lessened by ground truthing, certainly, but the R squared values was still 0.64, so it's not a bad estimate. And then also we paired this collection with TLS collection as well as RPAS, and so using this UAV imagery in conjunction with the ALS can really allow for very specific scaling, with slightly more accurate measurements. And then if we can apply that to the scaling across the landscape, that can give you better estimates. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Tristan. I'm not sure if this is something you want to speak to, but there is a bit of a chat going on about your defense date and where it landed in regards to the events going on. I'm not sure if you want to speak about that at all and how maybe that changed how you went into your defense and your maybe looking forward of what your research could become.
Yeah, I mean, oh, it was pretty crazy. I remember calling my supervisor the day before, and I'm like, do I still do this? Is this still, this seems crazy to be talking about all this work that I've done is, the baseline fuels how as they were in 2021, 2022. And then these suppositions or conjecture about how this, what we think this might, the implications we think this might have if a fire comes through, or the successional trajectories that might occur based on these signals if a fire doesn't come through. And so, yeah, lots of my work was in these severe stands. We might see a reversion to open conifers or grassland ecotypes, and then it's like, look, I'm speaking to that, but it's, you know, the world has caught up with me, and the fire can change everything in a heartbeat. So successional trajectories that I was envisioning because of this data are still valid outside of the burn perimeter, but definitely it changed a lot of the presentation to be like, and the caveat is that things are currently changing to a drastic degree, but still, yeah, a wonderful opportunity to, like, that doesn't happen a lot where you have such detailed fuels data characterized in such a way right before such an intense event, so we can really get down to the nitty-gritty of intensity and consumption.
Thanks, Tristan. Yeah, and I think it's important to note too, just the volume of data. And it's not necessarily of value for instantaneous operational use, but so much potential for future to look back and do some detailed analysis moving forward. And I believe I've heard this, but the data is shared with Parks Canada as well, correct?
Yeah, okay. So they've been using it. Yeah, immediately post-fire, there's the investigative team with CFS was also able to use this data for their immediate intensity values, I believe, post-fire. And yeah, we'll continue to collaborate from there.
Awesome. There's just a great comment here that this is really a great instance that counters the false idea that academic research can be very much removed from the real world. So, and then there's an interesting note here as well, letting everyone know that sometime in the new year, there will be a report out on the reconstruction of fire behavior in the Jasper wildfire. There's a group of fire behavior specialists and researchers working on that right now. So very much looking forward to that report. Thanks for sharing that. Does anyone have any additional questions? We've got about 7 minutes left in this session. I can continue to ask, but I would like to open it up if anyone is interested. You can either post in the chat or you can unmute if you would like to talk directly to Tristan. So while we wait, I know this is probably very much outside of your scope, so I apologize for this question, but I'm curious if there's been interest from various groups that work on carbon modeling, and if there's interest in using the data and the post-burn analysis to maybe look at it from a carbon perspective and emissions perspective, if you've heard anything on that front.
I haven't personally. I think there probably has been talks within the lab going forward, as I'm not sure how long, because I recently graduated and I've been working a bit on this in the past semester, but because I will be moving on, I haven't been talking too much about carbon modeling, but I'm sure that is definitely an interest and a possibility, as Dr. Chasmer is very versed in carbon modeling as well. And so it's definitely a possibility, and I'm sure if she can fit it into her busy schedule, that is definitely an avenue.
Very true. She is very, very busy and very much appreciated. Oh, Laura has said, Dr. Chasmer has said, definitely interested in carbon emissions. So that's great to hear. There's some really neat work going on in various areas of Canada on that front, and I know more and more public interest in that as well. So really neat. Tristan, I don't have any more questions directly related to your research here. If you're willing to, would you be able to send us your journal article once it's accepted, and we could share with the group? Okay,
of course.
And I'll give it another minute here in case any questions come in. Did you have any last minute things that you'd like to share, or things that you'd like to note before we end off here?
No, again, thank you so much for joining. I was amazed at the interest and very grateful for it. And yeah, just thanks to you as well, Karen, and Canada Wildfire for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Tristan. It was really, really great presentation, so timely. I look forward to reading the publication when it comes out, and I'm excited to see what your future brings, because I think it will bring some pretty great stuff moving forward. So congratulations on your graduation, and let's chat again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming, and we will see you in January. Have a happy holiday, everybody. Take care.